My son told me not to expect a dime, so I made sure I didn't need one. Her true story from California, my son said. Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million. At the will. The room was too quiet for so many people to be breathing inside it. Leather chairs creaked when someone shifted. A gold desk clock ticked like it was mocking me. The lawyer cleared his throat. I sat there, hands trembling in my lap, eyes fixed on the man holding my husband's last words on paper. And then, without lowering his voice, my son leaned in. Don't expect a dime, he said. No hesitation. No flicker of guilt. Just a cold, calculated tone that made my skin prickle. The words themselves didn't crush me as much as how he said them. Flat. Final. Like I was some stranger trespassing in his father's empire. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the boy. No, the man I had raised, the one I'd stayed up with during his fevers, the one I'd defended when his teachers called home. His expression didn't waver. He'd already decided I was out. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, but I forced my face into stillness. If he wanted to see me break, he'd be disappointed. The lawyer began reading. Each sentence felt like another nail in a coffin I hadn't built. The formal words rolled over me, estate, beneficiary, executorship, until I heard the first name. My son's. I kept my hands clasped tight so no one could see them shake. He smirked, just slightly, like this had been rehearsed. I wanted to scream. To ask him if this was the same boy who used to slip handwritten cards under my door on Mother's Day, the one who'd call me Mommy even at 13 when he wanted comfort. Instead, I said nothing. I let my mind wander, to the scraped knees I'd kissed, the packed lunches, the college tuition I fought to help pay when his father thought it was a waste. I remembered staying in a marriage that had been dying for years, partly because I thought our son needed both of us under the same roof. And now, here he was, looking at me like I was a liability to be cut out. But underneath the hurt, something else began to stir. A quiet, stubborn voice I hadn't heard in years. Something's not right. It wasn't the money. I could live without it if I had to. It was the way this entire reading felt. Staged. My husband's death had been sudden, but the paperwork was already too neat, too conveniently aligned against me. The lawyer kept reading, droning on about assets and trusts. I barely heard him. I was studying the details, the order of the names, the exact phrasing. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern I couldn't quite name yet. Then, just as I was beginning to drown in legal jargon, the lawyer paused. His eyes flicked up, scanning the room like he was searching for a reaction. And, he said slowly, there's an additional clause. Every head in the room turned toward him. The air felt heavier. An additional clause? He unfolded another page, his voice dropping slightly, as if the paper itself carried a secret. And then, he said, the lawyer read the part no one saw coming. The lawyer's voice faded into the background as my mind slipped somewhere else entirely. Years back. To when this all felt like love. I'd met my husband in my early 20s, when he was just starting to build what would become his empire. He had this way of walking into a room like he owned it, not in arrogance, but in certainty. I was drawn to that certainty. I thought it meant safety. The first years were golden. Late-night drives to the coast just to listen to the waves. Dinners where we talked about everything. Dreams, fears, the future. We built a home, a life, a family. When our son came into the picture, I thought my heart might actually burst from fullness. But success has a strange way of changing people. The man who used to share every thought with me started taking phone calls in the other room. Business, he'd say, waving it off. And at first, I believed him. Of course I did. Then came the private meetings with lawyers. Long lunches with clients I never met. The door to his home office always closed, even when he was inside alone. And slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, our son started spending more time with him than with me. Fishing trips. Weekend getaways. Conversations they'd stop when I walked into the room. I told myself it was just a father and son bond. That maybe they were planning surprises for me. That maybe I was imagining the sideways glances, the inside jokes I wasn't part of. But the truth was uglier. While I was busy making sure our home was warm, that meals were ready, that birthdays were perfect, they were building their own little fortress. And I was on the outside. I'd catch snippets, "Mom doesn't need to worry about this," or "Let's just keep this between us." Each time, it felt like a tiny thread snapping inside me. And still, I stayed quiet. Because love makes you blind. Because I didn't want to believe that my own son was learning to shut me out. Now, sitting in that sterile law office, I could see it all clearly. The grooming hadn't been accidental. My husband had been preparing him, teaching him how to protect his empire, even if it meant erasing me. But as I sat there, a memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought of in years. It was a rainy afternoon. I'd been cleaning out the storage room when I noticed it, a small, black, fireproof box tucked under a heavy tarp. I'd pulled at it, curious. My husband had appeared in the doorway almost instantly, his voice sharp. "Don't touch that." I'd laughed it off back then, teasing him about his little secrets. He didn't laugh back. That box had lived in the corner of his office ever since. I'd dusted around it, vacuumed near it, but never dared to open it. And now, I wondered. If my husband was capable of cutting me out, of turning my own son against me, what else had he hidden inside that box? I could feel my pulse quicken. Something told me that whatever was in there wasn't meant to be found, at least, not by me. But I also knew one thing. I was going to find it. I had no idea that box would change everything. I waited until the house was empty. No cleaning staff, no gardeners, no one to ask questions. The box was heavier than I remembered. The lock was simple, the kind you could open with the right hairpin and a little patience. My hands were steady, but my chest felt like it was full of fire. The click of the lock opening was louder than it should have been. For a second, I just stared inside. No jewelry, no stacks of cash, no family heirlooms. Just paper. Neatly stacked envelopes, all addressed to the same man, our family lawyer. The return address was our own. I slid the first letter out. It was my husband's handwriting, or so I thought. It was dated 2 years ago. The language was formal, cold, almost clinical. In it, my husband instructed his lawyer to update his will, leaving me everything. The business, the properties, the investments, all in my name. My breath caught. I pulled the next envelope. This one was dated just 6 months before he died. It was the opposite. Every asset was redirected to our son. I was left nothing but personal effects of sentimental value. I read the words 3 times, each pass hitting harder. But then, something gnawed at me. I pulled the earlier letter again, then the newer one, laying them side by side. The handwriting, it wasn't quite right. Same style, yes. But the loops on the Y were different. The slant leaned slightly the other way. The pressure of the pen wasn't the same. I'd spent years watching my husband jot down grocery lists, scribble business notes on napkins, sign checks. This wasn't his hand. My stomach turned. Someone had forged this. And I already knew who had access to his office in those last months. My son. I thought of all the afternoons he'd help his father with work. The times I'd seen them bent over the desk together, heads close, voices low. I told myself it was good for them, that my husband was teaching him about responsibility, leadership. Now, the image twisted into something else entirely. If this was forgery, it wasn't just betrayal. It was a crime. And if my son had a hand in it, then every soft memory I had of him was about to turn into ash. I sat there, staring at the stack of letters, feeling the weight of what they meant. If I pursued this, there would be no going back. No pretending we could fix our family. No fragile peace at holidays. But the truth had a way of demanding to be seen. And I'd been kept in the dark for far too long. I reached for the bottom of the pile, where a few loose documents had slipped out of their envelopes. Medical records. Old hospital files. I almost set them aside, until my eyes landed on a single sheet. It wasn't about my husband. It wasn't even about his estate. It was a birth record. My son's birth record. And right there, in black and white, under mother's name. Wasn't mine. My fingers went cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. What I found next made me question if my son was even mine. The birth record felt heavier than the entire box. I stared at the name under mother. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. I told myself it had to be a clerical error. Some hospital mix-up. A form misfiled decades ago. But that voice in my head, the one I'd been ignoring for years, whispered the truth. You already know. Hands shaking, I dug deeper into the stack. That's when I found it. A folded envelope with my husband's name on it. And inside, a DNA test. The kind they give you in a sterile lab, all graphs and numbers, with percentages that strip away every illusion. It was dated years before we were married. And it was clear. My husband was the father. The mother was someone I'd never even heard of. The room tilted. My pulse was in my ears. All those years, the diapers, the midnight feedings, the parent-teacher conferences, the scraped knees, I'd done it all thinking he was mine. That he was ours. And my husband had let me believe it. Had let me pour every drop of myself into raising a child who, biologically, was never mine to begin with. This cut deeper than the will. Deeper than the $92 million. This was betrayal at the bone. I thought of my son, no, his son, sitting there in the lawyer's office, smirking as if I were an inconvenience. He had no idea I knew. He had no idea how fragile the foundation of his smugness really was. I didn't cry. Not this time. The tears had burned themselves out somewhere between the first letter and that DNA report. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. If my husband had wanted to erase me from his legacy, if my so-called son wanted me gone, then fine. I'd stop trying to be part of their world. And I'd start taking it apart. I slid the documents back into the box, locked it, and hid it in my own storage space. Then I made my first phone call. Not to a friend. Not to family. To a lawyer. Not the family's lawyer. My lawyer. One who specialized in contesting wills, in sniffing out forged signatures, in pulling down the kind of lies that people like my husband built their empires on. She listened quietly as I laid it out. The letters. The handwriting that didn't match. The sudden changes in the will. The son who wasn't mine. By the time I finished, her voice was firm. We'll need more proof. But if this is what it looks like, we'll win. So I started gathering. Copies of his old handwriting from years ago. Financial statements showing the sudden transfer of assets. Witness statements from anyone who'd seen my son handling documents in his father's office. Piece by piece, I was building a case. And with every document I collected, the weight in my chest grew lighter. They thought they'd buried me under that will. They didn't know I was digging my way out, and pulling their secrets into the light as I went. The day we returned to court, he finally saw the side of me he'd underestimated. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Every step I took toward the courtroom doors felt like a chapter ending. He was already inside, my son. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly in place, but his eyes, they still held that same smug glint I'd seen in the lawyer's office. As if this was just another meeting he was going to win. My lawyer slid the files onto the table with deliberate calm. She didn't need theatrics. The truth would do the work for her. When the judge called us forward, she began. Exhibit after exhibit. Side-by-side comparisons of my husband's authentic handwriting with the forged signatures on the final will. Expert testimony confirming the differences weren't just variations. They were deliberate alterations. Timeline evidence showing when the changes were made, and who had access at the time. I kept my eyes on my son. At first, his jaw was set, his posture unshaken. But as the documents piled up, as each witness reinforced the truth, I saw it. The crack. A twitch at the corner of his mouth. A shifting of his shoulders. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, he understood this wasn't going his way. Then came the kicker. The earlier will. The one leaving me control of half the estate. The one he thought he'd buried forever. When the judge read it into the record, his smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Panic. It took less than 20 minutes for the ruling. The last will was invalid. The earlier one stood. The $92 million fortune would be split, half to him, half to me. But I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because winning the money wasn't the real victory. As we left the courtroom, he caught my arm. "Mom," he said, as if the word could still mean something. "I think we should talk." I pulled my arm free. There's nothing left to say. And I meant it. I sold the family home within weeks. Every trace of my husband's empire, the cars, the vacation properties, the luxury clubs, I either liquidated or gave away. With the money, I funded causes my husband had mocked: scholarships for girls from underprivileged neighborhoods, legal aid for women trapped in abusive marriages, housing programs for single mothers. Each check I signed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My son called, left voicemails, sent carefully worded emails. I deleted every one. He had made his choice long before that courtroom. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. The fight, the exposure, the final severing of ties. But regret is for those still holding on to hope. I walked away not just with money, but with a clean slate. No more pretending. No more bending myself to fit into someone else's version of family. The fortune was part of it, yes. But the real wealth came from cutting loose the weight I'd carried for decades. In the end, I didn't just take the money, I took back my life.